Harald Fairhair. If you're into Viking history at all, you've definitely heard the name. He's the guy, right? The legendary founder of Norway, the great unifier, the very first king. But what if I told you the whole story of Norway's founding father might be just that, a story? Let's dive into the fascinating mystery of the king who might not have even existed.
You know, every great national story needs a dramatic kickoff, and Harald's is pretty awesome. The legend goes that his entire quest, his whole reason for trying to unify a nation, started because a noble woman named Gyda shot down his marriage proposal. Her condition? She wouldn't marry him until he was king of all of Norway. Talk about playing hard to get. That one line supposedly launched a 10-year campaign of conquest and glory.
So here's how we're going to unpack this whole thing. First, we'll get into the heroic legend that everybody knows and loves. Then, we're going to start pulling at a few threads and see where the story starts to unravel. After that, we'll jump right into the big historical debate, weigh the evidence for Harald being a real man versus a total myth, and finally, we'll ask why this story is still so important, whether it's true or not.
All right, let's start with the legend. This is the blockbuster version you'll find in the great medieval sagas, a story of ambition, epic battles, and, believe it or not, a whole lot of hair.
Okay, so here's the textbook entry. Harald Fairhair, son of Halfdan the Black, the first king of Norway. The sagas tell us he came from the legendary Yngling dynasty, who were supposedly descended from the gods themselves. So right away, he's set up as this destined figure, the one who would finally unite all those scattered, squabbling kingdoms into one powerful nation.
And his journey is just so perfectly laid out. It all starts with that vow to Gyda. Because of it, he refuses to cut or comb his hair, earning him the nickname Tanglehair. Then comes a solid decade of fighting and conquering. It all comes to a head at the famous Battle of Hofsfjord, where he absolutely crushes his last opponents. And only then, once he's the undisputed king, does he finally get that haircut and a brand new name, Harald Fairhair. It's a perfect hero's journey, isn't it? Almost a little too perfect.
And this, right here, is where our story takes a hard left turn. Because as amazing as that legend sounds, when actual historians started digging for proof, they ran into some pretty big problems.
This is the big one. This is the question that really shook up the study of Norwegian history. How do you possibly separate the real person from the legend? I mean, what did people who were actually alive at the time have to say about this incredible king? Well, the problem is, they said almost nothing at all.
This timeline really shows you the heart of the issue, the silence. Harald was supposedly ruling in the late 800s and early 900s, but the incredibly detailed sagas that tell his life story, those weren't written down until around 1230. That's a gap of almost 300 years, 3 centuries. In the historical record from his actual lifetime, there's just radio silence.
And it gets even more complicated. We actually have an account from someone who was right there, right then. Around the year 890, a Norwegian chieftain named Arthur went to England and told King Alfred the Great all about his homeland. He described the political situation in detail, talked about all the different regional rulers, but he never, not once, mentions a single great king of all Norway. So the one contemporary source we have seems to directly contradict the entire saga story. That's a huge deal.
As you can imagine, this massive gap in the evidence has sparked a huge debate among historians. Starting in the last few decades, scholars began to really question the whole story, and they came up with some pretty radical new theories about Harald Fairhair.
So let's just break down the main arguments against the legend. First, as we just saw, there are 0 contemporary sources to back it up. Second, the famous Jelling stones in Denmark actually say a different king, Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, was the one who conquered Norway. Third, the earliest poems we have mention a King Harald, sure, but they never use that famous Fairhair nickname. And here's the real kicker. British sources from the 11th century do use the name Harald Fairhair, but they're talking about a completely different and much later king, Harald Hardrada, the guy who famously died fighting in England in 1066.
So, with all that, where do we stand? Well, scholars have pretty much split into 2 main camps, and each one has a really interesting explanation for who or what Harald Fairhair really was.
Okay, on one side you have the myth theory. This idea suggests Harald was basically a fictional character cooked up in the 1200s. And for good reason. It gave Iceland a fantastic origin story, people fleeing a tyrant. And it gave the Norwegian kings of that time a direct god-descended lineage to a glorious founding father. Super convenient. Then on the other side you have the man theory. This one argues, okay, there was a real King Harald,
But he wasn't the ruler of all Norway. He was probably just a powerful king in western Norway, and over hundreds of years his real story got bigger and bigger until it became the national epic we know today.
And that brings us to a really fascinating question. If his story is blown way out of proportion or even totally made up, why are we still talking about him? Why is Harald Fairhair still such a massive figure?
It's because the legend of Harald Fairhair became something much more than just a history lesson. It became a powerful symbol. Especially in the 19th century, when Norway was pushing for independence from Sweden, Harald was held up as this national icon, the founding father who represented a glorious, unified, and independent past.
This all hit a peak in 1872. And what was believed to be the 1000th anniversary of the Battle of Hofstrafjord, this huge national monument, Haraldshaugen, was unveiled. In that moment, the legend was literally set in stone, becoming a true cornerstone of modern Norwegian identity.
And that legacy is absolutely everywhere today, from the tourism industry in Norway to our global pop culture. He's a major character in the TV show Vikings. You can play as him in video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Crusader Kings. He even shows up in the manga Vinland Saga. His story, whether it's fact or fiction, is arguably more alive now than ever before.
So in the end, we're left with this thought. Harald Fairhair might be more legend than he was a man, a powerful symbol created centuries after the fact. But does that make him any less important? It really makes you think about what we want from our heroes and our history, the complicated, messy truth, or the powerful, unifying story. What do you think?